Buonasera a tutti, good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo, grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Italy is not just a place of beauty, but is a way of thinking. And today's guest invites us to rethink something that we often take for granted, the true power of Italy, the way it creates beauty. Luca Cottini is an associate professor of Italian studies at Villanova University, a scholar of literature and culture, but also something more unusual, a storyteller of innovation. As the creator of Italian Innovators, Luca explores the deep connections between culture, storytelling, and entrepreneurship. Originally from Varese and trained between Italy and the United States, his work reveals how Italian innovation is born from something unique, the fusion of art and industry, tradition and imagination. From Nutella to design, from literature to business, it shows us that in Italy, even the simplest object can tell a story. So today we're not just talking about Italy, we will be exploring a mindset, a way of seeing the world. So don't go anywhere, ma prima pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Benvenuto Luca, it's a true pleasure to have you on the Italian Radio Hour. How are you today?
Good, and thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be in this conversation.
Well, we kind of started this conversation in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, where we had the pleasure to meet at the event Luxury and Speed, sponsored by the Consulate of Philadelphia. And so we kind of started this conversation about Italy, innovation, your background. But without depriving our audience, I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes for you to tell us a little bit about your journey, as I have indicated in the introduction, from Varese to the United States. And was there a specific moment when you realized that your path will take you beyond Italy?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm an academic who discovered the path into academia at a certain point by just walking, going through a journey, like in a hero's journey. I was like a classical philologist in Italy. I was a middle school and high school teacher. And in doing that, I realized the beauty of teaching, which is an essential part of research. I love to study, I love to research. But I also realized that like research was a relational thing. And this is part of like an adventure that you have in teaching. So in working in high school, I realized that this relational aspect was predominant, kind of the educational aspect, but there was less time to research. In the option of going for a doctorate in Italy, the idea of researching was attractive, but it was deprived of the experience I was having as a teacher at that relational component. So I was looking outside Italy to see if there was any place where I could do the two things together. And that's how I applied for grad schools here in the US, where the idea of getting ready for a job is also intertwined with the idea of communicating it or practicing it right away. So every program contained kind of classes, courses, research, but also the activity of teaching. So that's how I got into Notre Dame. That was a surprise. Then at Notre Dame, I actually met the girl who will become my wife. And so my story became from an individual journey into something that entailed also your life. And in this sense, I am a researcher, in the sense that like you search a piece into a piece of reality to highlight in it a little piece of truth, and you do
Mhm.
it relationally. So the teaching part. But at the same time, in doing this, we also want to highlight something that gives taste to life, not something that is in se valuable, but something that makes knowledge enjoyable. And this is something very unique of Romance languages, where the word sapere, savoir, saber, means two things. One is to know, but the other one is to taste. When we
Mhm.
try something, we say sadi, and so we say it tastes like. So a knowledge that could produce this taste for living. And that's kind of like the adventure that then led me into academia, going then for my PhD at Harvard, and then going into my academic positions at McGill in Canada. And 13 years ago, I moved to Villanova. I recently became full professor of Italian studies, and I directed the program of Italian studies for many years. And in the meantime, developed this sense of research as this relationship that is productive, that is not like bouncing ideas back and forth in your head, but it's actually place them within a conversation, placing them within a dialogue. What happens in a
Mhm.
class is the same thing that happens as an author with the readers and as a creator online on YouTube with the viewers.
Mhm. Yeah, so you often say that teaching and studying, which seem to be two intrinsic and correlated activities, are like two lungs. And now you've been obviously in the United States, you've been away from Italy. So you often speak about observing Italy from the outside. So how did living in the US change your understanding of what it means to be Italian?
Well, in general, like when you grow up in a place, you assume the culture of that place. And I'm referring here to a city, a specific city. If you grow up in Los Angeles, your perception of America will be the Los Angeles perception of America. If you grew up in New York, the same. And for me, growing up near Milan, well, my understanding of Italy was very Milan centered. In the same way as for someone growing up in Rome, it would be a very Roman understanding of Italy. So going out of this dynamic allowed me to observe Italy as a whole. So from here, Milano and Palermo are at the same distance. Now, if
Mhm.
you move this to the logic of how to understand a culture, you can start seeing a culture from the perspective of literature, which
Mhm.
is my formation. But at the same time, you realize that outside Italy, some of the references might get lost, and actually, some perceptions of Italy might not necessarily be literary, but they might relate to fashion, they might relate to cinema, they might relate to a trip that someone might have taken. So, in this sense, literature started to interact in my academic path with photography, silent cinema, design, architecture, and the visual arts in general. So this forced me, also kind of the industry, this forced me to operate a synthesis among these different points of view. Literature is very high pitch, it's a very high perspective, but that same perspective from afar has to interact with kind of a lowbrow perspective. So, what's behind the two extremes? What connects them? And in this sense, what is at the core of what we call Italian culture?
Mhm.
And literature is a high manifestation of it. A product might be a low manifestation of it, but they
Mhm.
both contain a similar view or a similar soil. And that's kind of
Mhm.
the word cultura, cultivation, that I often use to describe what Italy, how I observe Italy as a soil primarily, a soil of great ideas in the entrepreneurial and the imaginative side.
Yeah. So, as you describe culture as cultivation and industry as labor potentially, so both forms create value. And why do you think Italy has been unique, capable of merging these two?
Well, in general, I observe the two things as the two coins of the two faces of the same coin. Culture, cultivation means to bear fruit. Industry comes from laboriousness, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, industria in Latin, and it has to do with the process of optimization of the material reality for it to bear fruit. So culture and industry need each other because they are doing the same thing. They are creating something that has both a material value and an intellectual value. The word value, like the word profit, like the word capital, have two lungs. We tend to exclusively see them in monetary terms, but they actually refer to both things. We match with a monetary figure something that has a value, an intellectual, a social, a spiritual value. So, in this sense, the Italian model is quite interesting because the approach to the construction of value, the approach to the construction of a product that is not just functional but speaks to the heart, speaks to the mind, is really deliberate.
Mhm.
So this came from a historical reason, but also as kind of a psychological attitude, we could say. The historical reason is that, like in the 19th century, all the other countries were industrialized way earlier than Italy, and Italy needed to find kind of a competitive niche. So in the late 19th century, we have a number of theorists. One is Camillo Boito, but also the liberty style. We see futurism, and then later in the 20s, rationalism and the movement Novecento. They all theorize the same thing. How do we distinguish ourselves from the rest of industrialized countries? And the answer is always like by adding to a cereal product an element of beauty, an element of art or philosophy or a storytelling component, something that could distinguish a product from a series and make it a unique terminal of a communication, of individual
Mhm.
communication. Now, this idea also goes back to the Renaissance. So the idea of creating objects that are endowed with a word, so objects that reflect a particular way of being. And that's something that happens in the courts, for example.
Mhm. There are some clear examples, sometimes too many to cite, but I'm going to give you a couple of names where a product has become something more than a product. In the introduction, I mentioned Ferrero, and another one that I learned more about it through you is Ducati. So would you mind expanding on these two names that we associate, but it's more than just a product. Again, it's a story and is some sign of ingenuity.
So, well, Ferrero, the immediate connection is Nutella. Nutella was product that developed over about 20 years. So the father of Michele Ferrero, Pietro Ferrero, pastone paste, which was called gianduiotto, mixing hazelnut and cocoa. This was done because there was a shortage of cocoa during the afterward in the aftermath of World War II, and so the idea of mixing them together was a solution to a need. Now, the pastone, the gianduia, was also called super crema in the 1950s, but in 1962, the Italian government passed a law that forbid the use of superlatives in products of food products. So super crema or something like super or extra was not allowed. This led to a 2-year search for a name for that object,
Mhm.
spreadable chocolate, which was in se a unique category. It would be as crazy as to say, I invented spreadable coffee. People would look at me like, what? So, spreadable chocolate is also associated with the name Nutella that was launched in March of 1964 and contained two elements. One is nut, so the vision of the Anglo-Saxon word at a time, 1964, when Ferrero was not in that market. So the
Mhm.
sense of the word. And the second part, Ella, relates to, well, Italian sounding words like mozzarella, caramella, stella, but more deeply to actually the fourth sound that we make after we are born. Mama, dada, papa, and la la. So the storytelling sound or the singing sound. So in this way, Nutella is a speaking nut or is a storytelling nut, which goes back to the idea of the childhood through the letter N, which connects us to our childhood. So in a way, this product is not just spreadable chocolate, but it's something that continuously generate new stories. In fact, there are other creams, chocolate creams, and with hazelnut on the market, but Nutella has a branding power that still today overcomes them because of this speaking nature of the product. So the product is not just itself, but it contains a life or a potential for generating new stories. In the case of Ducati, we have a story, an entrepreneurial story that develops like the story of a book.
Mhm.
The Ducati factory was created in 1926 out of initiative of Adriano Ducati. He was a student of Guglielmo Marconi in Bologna.
Mhm.
Marconi invented the radio. Ducati was the one who invented a part that allowed him to establish the first radio broadcasting from Bologna to the United States.
Because he was a physics, right?
Yeah. He was a physicist, and so basically, he started his own company of radio parts. It was the most important company of radio parts in Italy. He had like 5,000 employees, and he produced like razors. He produced like cameras. Um, but in 1944, well, it was bombed by the Allies during the war. And so that led the company to the kind of on the verge of bankruptcy. Well, one of the products that was developed over those years was kind of a product to maintain, to keep the company at the surface level. It was like a clip-on engine that was called Cucciolo, the cub or cubby, that was attached to bicycles. And that became really popular because with all the roads that were broken, destroyed by bombing, and the infrastructures that were still in phase of reconstruction, like two-wheel vehicles, like a bicycle or at the same time Vespa, were really desirable. So that really gave the company more oxygen and gave the company the second side of its story. So it's kind of stirring point, leading it to develop this story into motorcycling that then developed into kind of the legend of Ducati. It's kind of the Ferrari of motorcycling. And this is really the story of entrepreneurship as storytelling. So the idea of an entrepreneur is someone who constantly reads the events and makes choices or maybe changes direction. That's what the story of Ducati tells us, that entrepreneurship is really this lively adventure, constantly reading a market, being in a relationship with it as a source of new ideas.
Mhm. But you also talk about the metaphor, you use this nail, la chiocciola,
Mhm.
going forward by going back, but it's not a nostalgic going back because it sprints you towards the future. Can you unpack a little bit this idea for us? And then perhaps the segue would be how you would compare the Italian model for innovation and the American one.
I will start from here because it explains better what the snail idea entails. The American model, or I would say the Anglo-Saxon model of innovation, follows narration of the frontier. So innovation is always associated with the words pioneering, groundbreaking, or perhaps in the common expression, blue waters. So the idea of passing a limit and charting an unmapped territory. So in this sense, frontier implies the idea of innovation as a west, a continuous west that we continuously transcend. And this goes back to the 19th century American narration of the winning of the West. So that is a model we constantly assume in the sciences, in technology, but also in kind of research in the humanities. Now, the Italian model works a little bit differently. Certainly, it follows this idea of going west, breaking the new frontier, breaking the ceiling, if you want. But it goes back to a Renaissance archetype, which is the humanist archetype of finding again something that comes from the past as a resource to develop new ideas. So the humanists that find the codices from the Roman literature and Greek literature and finding them the force to recreate a new world. So this model is what I associate to the snail. The snail goes inside its shell to detect in it a heritage that is given not as an immobile deposit, but as a source of momentum that allows it to propel itself forward. Now, one model of innovation has to do with the novelty for the novelty's sake, or
Mhm.
has to do with the creation of many novelties or a cloud of novelties so that one winning idea could stay. So that's the pioneering model. The Italian model works in a different way. It tends to eliminate less ideas and ground an innovation a little bit more. So something that is new also has to be lasting. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying one model is better than the other. I'm saying that you have to understand the logic of one model to appreciate it. Uh, as an example, I often mention when Ferruccio Lamborghini launched his Lamborghini Miura. And
Mhm.
this car is phenomenal. But like when it was launched, Lamborghini said all the other cars will fade, but not the Lamborghini Miura. It will remain in history. And if someone hears this, well, the first reaction is like, how arrogant of you to say this. How dare you say that? The problem is, well, he was right. It's one of the most celebrated cars still nowadays. Now, from the perspective of what we said, Lamborghini already knew that, not because he was arrogant, but because he was already planning a product that was new, but also meant to last and meant
Mhm.
to become a classic. So that's a unique Italian approach to the creation of novelty originality. Not necessarily you will find this in a market in a very dynamic market like here. Maybe there are products that last over centuries, but they are mostly kind of the outcome of call it the Darwinian struggle of the fittest, or perhaps like
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah.
Mm, I don't know if they are the object of a deliberate intention to become classic in the
Mhm.
example of Lamborghini.
Yeah. So it looks like perhaps our world sometimes is obsessed with speed and disruption. So slowness can be somehow revolutionary, I would say. So you also have said in the past that limitations and scarcity have been quite the creative forces. And so, why do constraints produce such powerful innovation in Italy?
Well, this is something that we can understand very clearly if we think about cuisine. Uh, the Italian cuisine is based on a creative use of the leftover. American cuisine is richer, um, broader, more diverse, if you want. But the Italian approach relates to not infinite availability of ingredients and materials, but rather to how do we deal with kind of a limited amount of resources. So this is really something that forces us not to be lazy with the resources that we have or accept them as just given, but rather to observe them as potential. So in
Mhm.
this sense, the idea of the scarcity of cocoa not
Mhm.
as a condemnation, but as a potential to develop something new. So in this sense, scarcity is always the engine of inventiveness. It is the same, for example, in the 1930s with someone like Ferragamo, who was producing shoes in the United States, in Hollywood first, decided to move back to Italy. And in the 1930s, actually underwent bankruptcy. So he reestablished his company in 1936. And at a time when Italy was bound with what is called autarky, kind of self-reliance against the embargo that was imposed on Italy after the campaign of Ethiopia by Mussolini. Well, in that context, imports were very limited, and steel, for example, could not be accessed easily. So that forced Ferragamo, who used steel to create the shanks to support the shoes, to find other materials. And so what he did is like he found Sardinian cork as a new material that could be glued together in layers and form what we know now as the wedge heel. So his rainbow sandal of 1939, which he designed for Judy Garland after the performance in The Wizard of Oz, was the first wedge heel. So in this sense, scarcity not as a condemnation, but actually as the condition to develop the potential of things. Same thing with Nutella. The pastone that Pietro Ferrero created was sold in southern Italy, and during the summer it melted. So instead of recalling the product, the Ferreros actually heard that people had started to spread this melted chocolate on slices of bread. So instead of observing this mistake moralistically, they actually saw it as the possibility to develop a unique idea, which is kind of the crazy notion of spreading chocolate, which we know now as Nutella.
Wonderful. So we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back with Luca to talk about storytelling as the heart of the business.
Do you love Italian food? Want to learn the secrets of homemade pasta, sauces, and traditional recipes, just like Nana used to make? At Mondo Italiano, our authentic Italian cooking classes bring the taste of Italy right to Pittsburgh. From fresh pasta to regional specialties, every class is a delicious journey through Italy's culinary traditions. Spots fill quickly, so reserve your seat today. Call us at 412-478-2681 or find us online. Mondo Italiano, where Italy comes alive one dish at a time.
Un caffè, per favore. For more than 35 years, Pittsburgh has started its mornings with La Prima Espresso. From freshly roasted beans from around the world to the perfect espresso or cappuccino, every cup is crafted with care. Stop by and enjoy the warmth of our baristas and familiar faces, or bring the taste of Italy home. Order online today at laprima.com. La Prima Espresso, Pittsburgh's coffee. Okay, so we are back and we're going to continue our conversation with Luca about culture and industry as not being separate worlds, but we are talking about also Italian products, not just as being functional, they are stories themselves. So in your opinion, when does an object become a story?
Well, an object in kind of its origin, objectum, is something thrown across. So in this way, an object works similarly to the word parola in Italian, which comes from the Greek parabole, parable, which means also to throw across. So both objects and words are vectors that we use to connect what is in our head, in our imagination, to someone who is receiving it. So in this sense, they are terminals of a communication. I interact with you through the words of my book or through our words now. There's kind of a bridge in between us through the use of certain words. In the same way, like a book communicates across time and geographies, because when you pick it, you have an individual communication with someone who perhaps wrote this book 2,000 years ago or 400 years ago. And it's a personal, present, and unique communication. In the same way, objects work as terminals between the creativity of an entrepreneur who designs something to enter in a relationship with, call it an unknown lover, like for an author. And the object in this context becomes the place, the platform where you and I, we don't know each other, suddenly interact. So this is quite a fascinating dynamic, and it is the core of authorship, and it's also the core of entrepreneurship. If you ask entrepreneurs why they do it, very rarely they would say, or they would admit with honestly, for money. Money is a measure of something else. I'm not discarding the value of money, but they will all tell you, I'm doing it because there's something in me that is calling me to enter in a relationship with someone, or share a passion, share a piece of reality that I'm fond of. So in this sense, this works in the same way as teaching, as we were saying before. You research a piece of reality, find out its potential, and share it with students or viewers or readers as a way to augment it. The measure of that exchange is what we call money. But that exchange transcends the monetary value, is infinitely more than that, because like it creates relationships that last over time. Perhaps it creates social good. And this is the story of many Italian companies, that even American companies, that created through the sales of their product, realities that transcended the product itself and became a social good, a social benefit. So in this sense, the element of culture, of storytelling, adds to the product, or adds to the exchange, an element of genuineness, an element of authenticity, an element of depth that transcends like the transactional nature of, well, I buy, I sell, you buy, and becomes instead something that aspires to create a much longer or much deeper story.
Yeah. So along these lines, I love your idea that objects become characters. So can you give us some additional examples of products that truly speak?
Well, if you have been to Italy, like, and I'm sure you've seen this, but like for the viewers, you might have seen like the bottle of Campari. Campari is an aperitivo drink, so it's both a mixer for cocktails, but also a self-standing drink. Now, the bottle that I refer to is a bottle that was designed in 1932 by Fortunato De Pero. He is a futurist painter, artist who worked for Campari and designed the iconic conic bottle of Campari that is still in use in all bars. And it's quite remarkable to see how a product that is like 94 years old is still hot, is still lively today, still sells. What is interesting in it is that like the bottle comes as a transfiguration of a theatrical play that De Pero staged, which was called balli plastici, plastic ballet, where characters were designed as conic puppets. So these puppets also were transfigured in painting through the images of characters that had like perhaps their arms or their legs shaped like cones. And this idea then is transported into plastic reality in the design of an object in the conic bottle that became so iconic later. So in this sense, the bottle acts like a puppet. We have it in our hands and we are handling something that is not only designed by an artist, something that you would find in a museum, and instead it's just a bottle, but it is also something that aspires to be a living agent, like a puppet, or as we say, Nutella, like a speaking nut, or an acting bottle.
Yeah, yeah. And so looking at today's with the branding and marketing everywhere, in your opinion, do companies still understand storytelling, or have we lost something?
Well, certainly companies, certain companies understand this very well. And this happens to an Italian company or to an American company. In general, and this is an observation at the level of kind of a kind of broad consideration, many companies tend to consider the act of planning and execution as an act that comes before storytelling. So
Mhm.
what we will call marketing. So you create your product, research and development, create your product, make sure it works, make sure you produce it, and then you add to it the marketing or what you call the story. In the Italian case, and this is really prominent to Italy, planning and execution are actually contemporary to storytelling. So storytelling is already part of the planning. You're creating an object that both works and speaks. This is kind of deliberate since the beginning. Now, you might be familiar with the story of Vibram. Perhaps you've seen like, the Five Fingers. It's a very successful product. Well, that relates to the imagination of Vitale Brahmani.
Mhm.
Vibram are the initials of Vitale Brahmani, who designed in 1937 the Carro Armato Sole, which is the rubber sole. The first time it was used, he had a client who was Leopoldo Pirelli, who told him that he could use vulcanized rubber for soles. So he used that as an anti-abrasive, and from that time on, uh, soles became a self-standing thing. And he developed this product not only as a solution to a problem, kind of anti like avoid the sole to slip in the mountains. And this is still the greatest, the product that sells the most of its company. But he also designed this sole with the decorations and the motifs that you find on the pavement of the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele in Milan. So he basically conceived of this product not just as a solution, but also as a form to storytell about his own city. He had a shop near the Galleria. And so if you walk in the Galleria, you will find some cross decorations that you will see also in the design of his rubber sole. So this explains how storytelling was already embedded in the planning and execution of an object. And this is something that in the Italian case, due to the story that we saw before, is very evident.
Mhm. So let's shift gears, so to speak, because now we're talking about you, and we're going to talk about Italian innovators, kind of when academia meets the world. So this is a wonderful YouTube channel where it's divided also in different offerings or lectures and videos and stories. So can you share with the audience how, where Italian Innovators was born, and describe what it is, and how do you select the protagonists of the Italian Innovators episodes?
So Italian Innovators was born in 2018 when my book on the origins of Italian design came out. It's called The Art of Objects. The book traces the early encounter of Italian entrepreneurs and Italian designer artists in the late 19th century as a way to, again, differentiate the Italian product that was kind of late in the industrial competition. The book was successful, and I realized very early on that it contained potential for a larger conversation than a sole academic conversation. So I decided to create profiles of Italian entrepreneurs or Italian innovators who adopted this method of adding to an object something cultural or something aesthetic. And so in this sense, like what? Okay, sorry. In this context, I saw that these stories of entrepreneurs that look for artists to define their products in a different way, could become something like an exploration of the Italian model to innovation, which is not the byproduct of a systematic reflection, but it's actually something that develops on a case-by-case basis. So on Italian Innovators, I started to create these profiles to talk about Campari, to talk about Bialetti, to talk about Guccio Gucci, to talk about like Senatore Borletti, the founder of La Rinascente, and explore their stories as a way to illuminate different manifestations of this Italian approach to originality, which wants to create products that are new, not because they are novelties, but because they speak. So the product grew over the years, and this became really the terminal of a larger conversation. I added lessons to it, which I regularly use in class, and I know that many colleagues in Italian studies regularly use in American universities. I added interviews, conversations with contemporary innovators, and this became a platform of conversation on Italian, so Italy, the model of innovation that Italy has. Can we define that? My approach is like, yeah, but on a case by case basis. And it became also a conversation on innovators, so on innovation, meaning where does originality stem from? Where is originality born? And how the encounter with Italy and Italian culture can be an immense trigger of originality. So this is how I started to transcend what we do in class, in my job, and what I do with books, again, with my job, into kind of a larger conversation, which entailed professionals, entrepreneurs, designers, on is there an Italian way to innovation, or how do you find an original idea? So that is the value of it. That is the contribution of it as a platform of exchange and a platform of broader conversation where scholarly research meet public, kind of the public arena and the public good.
Yeah, and actually, so it almost like it feels like an extension of almost like a public classroom. And you're very rigorous, obviously, in your research. You're very passionate, which the two of them, it's always, the challenge is how to translate academia into storytelling. So, was your style the same right off the bat, or it took a little while before getting to what is the format of the program now?
Well, we talked about the 20 years of development of Nutella. 20 years is an interesting measure because it's also the same time that Italian writer Manzoni took to develop his most famous novel, I Promessi Sposi.
Right, this policy.
So the same dynamic applies to me. The more you create a story, the more you refine it in dialogue with those who interact with you through that platform. So the object or the word or the story is a landing place, or call it a piazza, where someone who starts it interact with someone who receives it, and the person who receives it tells it again. And so this is part of our conversation. You were telling me what you're seeing in exploring my stories, and this is always a source of new ideas, a source of refinement in my style. So that is really the value, the true value of the exchange, which goes beyond the kind of numbers of people who view this, but actually it's the exchange of experiences, life, passions that inevitably enriches you who receive it, but also me. So in this sense, I want to go back to the word author, which is a unique word that comes from a Latin origin. Auctor comes from a Latin verb augeo, which means to augment. So the author is someone who is augmented, but also augmenting at the same time. And this is kind of the magic of storytelling, the magic of like this exchange where something that is augmenting me, say my research, uh, perhaps might augment someone else, and in doing that, gets back to me and augments me even more. So that's how a style is refined, and that's how you find an idea. Again, I go back to the humanistic model, which is very central to the Italian understanding of entrepreneurship, because like this is also the model of a slow growth rather than kind of the novelty for the novelty's sake. So in this sense, the stories that I create are not meant to be immediately consumed and burnt, but are stories that are meant to start slowly and build up with time, a kind of a deposit of new values and a deposit of new stories, both for you and for me.
And in your storytelling, it seems like you are less interested in chronology and more in that triggering moment. You also quote Plutarch, Parallel Lives, and his way of presenting Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. So tell us a little bit the parallel of your approach to the storytelling and the chronology, and also Plutarch approach to it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'm delighted to see that you've read my book on Ferrero, where I discuss these things. I recently wrote a biography of Michele Ferrero. It is true, I'm less interested in the chronology of a character or what we would call kind of a corporate story of a character, if of a company. Why? Because like, well, corporate stories are all the same. The company started here. Here's where we opened the first factory. Here's where we reached like $1 million. Here's when we started to produce in another market. So they tend to follow the same trajectory, but they forget the question of what was the energy that set all these things in motion and where this idea that led to this product was born in the first place. So in this sense, I'm not telling you a chronology because it's kind of an obvious narrative. You wouldn't read a book that starts from Adam and Eve of every certain situation. You would start a book from a stumbling block, from an event that changes the trajectory of a character. So in the same way, I observe these moments in the innovators that I explore. Like, where is the moment when Giorgio Armani became Giorgio Armani? And in this sense, I go back to the model of Plutarch because, like, when he was writing biographies of characters, very famous characters of the ancient world, like placing them in a dual track, Greek characters and Roman characters, all the readers already knew everything about them, already knew everything about Caesar or Alexander the Great. So for Plutarch, what was interesting was not to retrieve that chronology or that narration, but was important to observe when Alexander the Great became Alexander the Great, when Julius Caesar became Julius Caesar. What was that force? This is useful for me because it illuminates the point of Italian Innovators, which is not to give biographies of Italian entrepreneurs, but actually to explore models of originality that are born from a particular milieu, from this particular Italian milieu. How do they develop there and why? This is done because I don't think that the Italian model is the only possible model to create value. But I do think that the encounter with this model is a powerful trigger for new ideas wherever you come from. So, in this sense, abstracting from a character and from the facts of the biography of a character, the driving force is a way to connect with people who might not be familiar with the same set of circumstances, and actually to draw from these facts some values or ways of being or ways of operating that might serve the purpose of creating innovation in India or South Africa or Canada.
Mhm. And also something else is very important is the human aspect, the human side of innovation. Again, another example that you show us is how Ulysses poses himself in front of Polyphemus before his undertaking. So perhaps you can elaborate on that. And also you had a personal loss in your life that has changed your relationship with your work. So let's talk about the human side of innovation or of a situation that might trigger.
Mhm. Well, there is like we're all capable of creating new things, but the thing that we call innovation is not merely the creation of new things or new ideas,
Mhm,
but actually the ability for these new ideas to matter. There's a word importante, important, that
mhm,
relates to the verb importare in Latin, in Italian, which means to matter. So we call innovation what actually matters, something that suddenly transcends the element of novelty to become something that touches us and
mhm,
changes our own trajectory. Um, so in this sense, certainly, there are like facts in life that um, bring us a different awareness of ourselves that might change our trajectory, and they might bring to light what is really relevant. Um, or they might open a new path, like in the hero's journey in a narrative. So, in this sense, again in my personal life there are certain people that really determine kind of a shift in the way I perceive myself, and this is also kind of the work that you do as a teacher. As a teacher, you are someone called to open a window in someone else's life. As a narrator, perhaps you're called to open a different space of possibility in
mhm,
someone else's life. So, in the same way, the stories of the entrepreneurs I deal with are really powerful reminders that, like, the story that we create is a story that we create, and not like a story that falls upon us and we look at it with fatalism. But so, in this sense, narrating teaches you not to react, but actually to choose where you want to go. No, a character faces difficulties along the journey, and he or she is always forced to make a decision on where to go, not just like absorb the heat and just remain there. We want to know where someone goes next. So, in this sense, they are inspirations for us to walk a truly human journey. And that is the case of the entrepreneurs. That is the case of like kind of a teacher. That's the case of a narrator, trying to find the human element or something that makes sense within our journey.
mhm. So I'm going to add another narrator. I'm going to add another title, which is translator between Italy and US for yourself. So how, as you often describe yourself, so how these two cultures still might misunderstand about each other or
Uh,
understand, if we want
I
to
I
look
would
at
take it. I
it.
would take it as kind of within the dynamic of a relationship, of an affective relationship. You encounter someone who is a you, who is different from you, and that stirs the question on like what makes you you, and the other question that comes from it is like, well, then what makes me me? This is the same dynamic that you have in the relationship between cultures. You might travel to another place, perhaps to Italy, and ask yourself, why are things like this? What makes you you? And in the same way, ask yourself, well, why then my space is shaped like the way it is, both in the architecture and in the mental space, in the imagination. So, in this sense, the work of a translator is a privilege and a torture at the same time because you place yourself between two words. And well, literally, translator means to carry across in Latin. And so, in this sense, you kind of carry from one word something that goes into the other word, and you always have to bring it back and forth. And this is really beautiful because it allows you to observe your own world through the lens of the other and perhaps relativize your world a little bit and acquire a broader dimension of it. This is truly important at the level of education. For a kid born in Italy going to the United States is a way to observe Italy from a completely different perspective, as I described. But also for a kid from the United States going to Italy, it's the first time to observe oneself from a distance and start asking, what are the pillars of my culture? From kind of growing up in it, it is very close and it's very difficult to see a canvas when it's like right in front of your eyes. So that sense of distance is really, really important. It is also a torture because sometimes what is impressive in one word is not in the other, or sometimes what is comprehensible in one word is not comprehensible to the other. So in this sense, we all need a translator to understand where the message is. So what kind of message are we delivering? So that by understanding that, we can align our expectations to that message in the same way as, like, the snail approach that we described. Once you know that this is the approach, well, then you start to appreciate certain forms that come from it in a completely different way, rather than imposing your own format on a different kind of code. So in this sense, it is a torture, but it's also a pleasure. And it is the possibility to build a valuable interaction that transcends kind of my own identity and reconfigures the me into a dialogue with you. So what I was describing about the enrichment of stories, I think, has to do with this dynamic of growth and augmentation, if you want, of enrichment of the human experience.
So looking ahead, what gives you hope about the future of Italy?
Well, I mean, I would say that Italy has always been like, well, people call it a cradle of civilization, but it's always been like a fertile soil. So in this sense, the fruits that this soil generates are really a confirmation of the goodness of the earth that produced them. So in this sense, this will continue. And the relationship between Italy and the United States is also a very solid one, because of like the history that binds the two countries together, the continuous exchange, transatlantic exchange between Italians coming here and Italian Americans going back to Italy, which transcends the political colors of the governments that are in place here or in Italy from time to time. So there's something that is above that political level. Certainly, the political level develops in different ways throughout the decades, depending on the situations. But there's an aspect, what we call culture, or what we call also kind of trade, that binds Italy and the United States together in a path of unity and diversity at the same time. And so this is really, really interesting. What gives me hope is the possibility of building spaces where this dialogue could build new fruits, could bear new solutions and new ideas, and not for the sake of them, but for kind of the human growth, which is kind of contained in the American Constitution, the call, the pursuit of happiness as this idea of kind of self-determination, but also of freedom in kind of pursuing that fulfillment of our human journey. I think the encounter with a very deep, authentic, and genuine culture like Italy is part of that journey. So,
Luca, this conversation reminds us that Italy is not just a place of beauty, but a way of thinking and a way of creating and a way of seeing the world. And we thank you very much for rediscovering it together today. But unfortunately, our time together is up, and il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. And also don't forget to share, because sharing is caring. So I would like to thank my guest one more time, Luca Cottini, for this very insightful conversation about culture and innovation. Our sponsors, Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.
Grazie, ciao.